Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and as a lot of you know, I do construction updates for brand new attractions and rides coming to Southern California, and by far the most prolific over the past year and a half was being built at Six Flags Magic Mountain and just recently opened up this January of 2020, but it's finally time to do my full in-depth review of West Coast Racers. West Coast Racers is a brand new quadruple launch twin lap racing coaster built by Premier Rides, with many design aspects being done by the West Coast Customs crew, which, if you did not know, is one of the most famous custom car shops on the West Coast as well as in all of the United States. They're well known through their popular shows like Pimp My Ride and have had quite the social media influence with designing cars for people such as will.i.am, Justin Bieber, and even Jeffree Star. But West Coast Racers, this brand new coaster, is really built around the idea of racing. And to be more specific, street racing in LA. And the ride is a first of its kind, with it being a quasi-Mobius loop dueling coaster powered by 4 linear synchronous motor, or LSM, launches, which will propel you multiple times at 55 miles an hour while you face off against another train full of riders. Now we'll get into the details of the rest of the ride and the area in just a little bit, but first we gotta figure out how to get to the ride from the front entrance of the park. Now, once you find your way towards Magic Mountain's front entrance, you will be introduced to a Main Street plaza that you will end up hooking a right-handed turn towards some fountains, as well as a stunning view of Tatsu, the park's flying coaster, and Revolution, which was the world's first modern vertical looping coaster. By the time you reach that fountain, you'll want to make a left turn, and from here there's actually a couple ways to get to the underground, which is the brand new rethemed area that holds West Coast Racers. But on your walk, you will be introduced to the Grand American Carousel, and at that point there are 3 options of which way you could walk towards the underground. On the left, there is the main path, which will lead you past X2, as well as Viper, which leads up to the summit of the hill for which Magic Mountain gets its name. Soon you will pass by the entrance of Tatsu, which is that flying coaster I was talking about just a little bit ago, and you will go straight past it, starting to walk on a downward slope. Before you know it, you'll see West Coast Racers starting to race around the area, and you'll be surrounded by the underground. Now, if you take that middle route, which is almost like a shortcut to that previous route I was talking about, you will head towards Revolution and then turn right into its exit pathway, which leads to a set of stairs which will bypass walking by X2 and Viper on that main path, and then you will follow the same route. Or if you don't feel like walking up the massive hill, take a right towards the helpful Honda Express and get a nice calming ride all the way up to the summit of the mountain. From that point, you actually have 2 options of which to go, left or right, and starting with the left, it will lead to a stairway right in front of Tatsu's entrance, where it will meet up with the other routes that I've been talking about, where if you go right, you'll be entering the underground from an opposite side, in which you will bypass Superman as well as Jetstream once you make a left at the bottom of the hill. Now, once you've made it into the underground, I should probably explain a little more. This area was originally known as Cyclone Bay and was the home to one of the first wooden coasters at the park, being the Cyclone. Now, this coaster was not very well liked for its roughness, and it eventually closed in the early 2000s. Cyclone Bay stayed the same, however, as a brand new ride was introduced called Terminator Salvation. This was a brand new GCI wooden coaster, which would soon take on the mantra of Apocalypse the Ride. Apocalypse the Ride is still there for your enjoyment today and is the only wooden coaster at the park. And that offers a great ride, at least in my opinion, and I will actually have a review on that ride soon. But starting in 2018, the park finally got around to giving Cyclone Bay some much needed love and converting it to the all-new LA-centric Underground. With most of the buildings and designs to be done by West Coast Customs and the park itself, the area took a brand new feel. Now, instead of cracked pavements, carnival games, and some loosely tied boardwalk theming, it is now an open street with parking spots and vibrant colors all around. I will be completely honest with you and say Cyclone Bay was my least favorite part of the park. I always dreaded walking through it and wouldn't spend more than 5 minutes in the area, even if I still had friends on Apocalypse. Now, with the recent changes done in that section of the park, I can definitely say the Underground is one of my favorite areas of the park. Now, I don't know if I would say it's my absolute favorite, but it is easily one of the best changes I've seen at the park in the past decade. And to be honest with you, I only have one complaint with the land, and that would be the lack of shade as of right now. But with some palm trees planted as well as some other plant life growing into the future, I'm very excited to see what the area will look like in a couple of years. Now, the Underground actually has a couple places for food, including the twin charged tacos and the chicken coop, which offer street tacos and chicken and waffles and other chicken dishes respectively, while right next door, Coaster Candy has every piece of fudge or candy that you could ever dream of. I personally have not been able to check out the chicken coop as of yet because it has been closed every time I've been to the park, but Twin Charge Tacos and Coaster Candy are some of the best buildings, I would say, at this time. Now, if you're not in the mood for a full meal or just some candy, you can always check out Snack Tracks, which is a little farther away and right across from Apocalypse's entrance. This snack shack offers some great ice cream as well as pretzels and other things for your light eating needs. But of course, this is not just a review for the Underground, it's a review of the star attraction, West Coast Racers. So, in the exact center of the Underground, you will find the West Coast Customs shop, which is actually the queue building as well as station for the ride itself. The exterior of the building itself is mainly black and has some nice blue and gray details, but it overall looks very clean. But just to the right of that building, you will see the entrance as well as an entrance sign saying West Coast Racers, and that is the proper entrance for this coaster. Once you enter underneath that sign into the queue space, you will come upon a couple of switchbacks on the outside portion, which is covered completely, so you don't need to worry about that harsh sun in the summer while waiting for West Coast Racers, which is a great thing. But while you're in this covered outdoor queue, you will be surrounded by designs as well as history involving the West Coast Customs brand. There are many billboards showing off the different logos throughout the years, as well as the company's history from moving to Burbank, as well as doing popular shows. Now, another prominent feature of this outdoor queue is a giant mural wall, which is covered in graffiti, and it looks absolutely awesome. It's one of my favorite parts of the land, as well as the ride itself. There is some amazing graffiti murals all over the area, not just in the queue, and they all look really amazing. And I'll actually leave the artist's Instagram in the video right here, so if you want to check out any of his future projects or some of the things he's done in the past, because it is brilliant. Anyway, after getting an awesome look at that mural wall and going through some of the switchbacks and reading up on your West Coast Customs history, which I think is a really cool thing to have, you will be led towards a side entrance into the West Coast Customs shop. Now on this side of the shop, it is pretty barren. It's pretty much just a black wall and then a giant West Coast Customs W right above the doorway to get into the station building. Now this doorway is quite small. It's just a regular door realistically, so it's not as grand as it could potentially be, but I can understand it considering at the shop, most of the doors are just regular doors. So it may be startling for a more theme park oriented person. But right before you enter that door on the right hand side, you can see one of the main proponents of the ride, and that is the first and third launches, which duel and start your first and second lap. But we'll get to that in just a little bit of time because we're walking into the West Coast Customs shop. Now inside the interior queue, there is a heck of a lot more theming as well as detail, the first of which being on your left-hand side, one of the many designs that West Coast Customs has done over the years. This is the Rocket. This is their design that they actually did for will.i.am for his Tesla, but it is a very nice looking custom car within the interior queue. But there is a reason it is this type of car, and we'll get to that in just a little bit of time. But right next to the car, there is a TV showing off some pre-show elements potentially. And if you're in the interior queue for an extended period of time, you can even get some information about West Coast Customs and the ride itself. Now, eventually you will come across some really awesome screen elements that act as garage doors to show off a fabrication department as well as a paint department. And these both have 30+ minute long looped videos showing off the process of fabrication for a car and even painting for one of the 3 trains for West Coast Racers itself, which I think is an absolutely awesome element. And they are both surrounded by a couple pieces of equipment like paint cans and drills and other things like that to really try and tie into that type of workshop vibe. But soon you will come across a spiral staircase. Just before that though, there is a sink to dump out any liquids that you have. So make sure to do that because we don't want any spilled drinks all over other people's bags. So just as a tip, I would not have your bottle get filled right before you jump in line. And just right next to that as well is an elevator that is definitely usable for anyone who needs it. So if you have an ADA pass, this is the way you can get up to the actual station itself, which is on the 2nd floor. But if you're not taking the elevator up, you'll soon find yourself going up a spiral staircase that is supposed to emulate a spiral staircase at the West Coast Customs shop, and it gives you a nice view of the station building as a whole. Now, when you get to the 2nd floor, it will get a little tighter in queue space, and you'll pretty much be limited to 1 person across. At this point, you actually will take your bags as well as potentially bigger items and put them in a bin that will be right next to that part of the queue space. Now, the reason this is because West Coast Racers has an interesting loading system. You will load and unload on the same side, so you don't have to go through a train, if that makes any sense. You just enter from the right-hand side, and when the ride's over, you exit from the right-hand side. But if you just have phones or glasses or a wallet, there are pouches for every single seat for West Coast Racers on the train. So if you just have those items, you can zip them up in those pouches during your ride experience. Now, before you know it, you'll enter into the turnstile and get lined up in one of 6 rows, which each row holds 2 people. So it is possible to have 12 riders per train, which honestly isn't the best, but I don't mind it. I have not waited longer than 40 minutes for this ride, and from what I hear, if you're inside the interior queue, it shouldn't be more than a half-hour wait. Now, surrounding you in the station, it is a little bland, I would say, but there are some cool decals showing off the West Coast Customs brand on a blue wall that is just across the way. Now, of course, it's gotten to that point, and we are ready to ride, so let's hop in our seat. Now, since West Coast Racers is a Premier Rides launch coaster, the seat itself is quite deep, a little snug, and it will have a lap bar. Now, this lap bar will have pretty tight shin restraints as well as a lap restraint, and both of these restraints offer some pretty nice cushion, but for a lot of people can be a little tight, especially when getting in and out of the seat. Now, if you've been on full throttle at Magic Mountain, you know exactly how this restraint portion works. Just subtract that seat belt buckle that you have to worry about on full throttle. But because of that, there is a over-the-shoulder restraint as well on West Coast Racers called a comfort collar that if you've been on Electric Eel at SeaWorld San Diego, you know exactly what this is. This is just a restraint that goes over both your shoulders and can link up into the lap bar restraint itself. Now, I know a lot of people throw their hate at this restraint, but it's realistically just a seat belt that's really loose and made of rubber. Now, if you're on the shorter side, you may have problems during the ride with maybe some of the comfort collars hitting you in the side of the head potentially, or even the ears. But me personally, at 6 foot tall, I have never had a problem with comfort collars on Electric Eel or even West Coast Racers. I honestly rarely feel them or notice that they're there at all, but I know a lot of people do find some problems with them. But I digress. The restraint system is a little awkward to get into because you do have to raise that comfort collar as you're entering while shimmying into the restraint area before sitting down, pulling down your lap bar, and then latching in your over-the-shoulder comfort collar into that. It's a little confusing, I know, but once you ride it once or twice, you'll definitely get the hang of it and it won't be a problem. And with that, we should be off to the races on West Coast Racers. Let's get to the bulk of the ride portion. Now, as your ride starts, you will slowly roll out of the station, find yourself face to face on your left-hand side with another train. You line up side by side perfectly on the first and third launches of the ride, and this is actually a place that I've experienced some trash talking between the trains, of course in a family-friendly way, about who's going to win the race. It always adds a cool element while you sit there for a couple seconds before, of course, launching to 55 miles an hour. Now, this launch isn't crazy forceful or anything like that. It's actually quite gradual, but immediately after this launch is over, you will be vaulted into one of the best elements, I would say, on the ride, and that is the high five moment. Now, on this first lap, or as what I will be referring to as the white side of the track, has an insane airtime moment that will shove you out of your seat and make you start to laugh involuntarily. But this was one of my biggest surprises on the ride itself. I was not expecting this amount of laterals as well as airtime on this one moment alone, on the white side especially, and even more so if you're sitting on the right-hand side of the train. Now, immediately after this awesome high five moment, you'll go from banking left to banking right very quickly, while the opposing side, the yellow side of the track, goes right underneath you. And of course, following this is a Top Gun stall. And if you know Twisted Colossus, that's the moment where the green side is upside down above the blue side, where you can get another high five moment, except this time, one of the trains is inverted. Now, this element offers some amazing hang time for being on the white side, and for the yellow side, we'll get to that in just a little bit, but it is an amazing moment for just getting to look at the other train and trying to interact with them. Now, immediately after this, you will dive down to one of the lowest points on the ride, going underneath the yellow track, which will then pop up immediately to give a tiny bit of floater airtime. So just very minor weightlessness. But this actually has a very interesting moment at the climax of this hill, and that's the fact that it has some very interesting lateral forces. For half a second, it pushes you left. For another half a second, it pushes you right, and then left again. It's a very interesting moment, and it adds a little funkiness to the layout. But of course, as you're heading left again, you're dropping down into a section over a wash for rainwater into a second launch. Now at this point you might be a little behind or maybe even a little ahead of the other train, but you'll hit this second launch in a very interesting way, I would say. It's not a constant speed, it's almost like a little boost. I would actually equate it to a mushroom in Mario Kart. It's just an instant pop of speed that really kind of comes out of nowhere. But make sure you're looking just to the right because that's the portion of the ride where a camera is for your picture on the ride. But with that extra gain speed, you will head up into the second inversion, which is this amazingly tall corkscrew. And I gotta say, this is one of my favorite parts of the ride just because of the extreme hang time that you get from it. You really start to feel like you're floating while you're upside down, and it's a really awesome feeling. Now, immediately after this, you'll turn left and be winning your race, at least for that time being, until the yellow side train will catch up and potentially pass you. And this is one of the more forceful parts of the white side. It's not really that forceful per se, but it's definitely on the more forceful side, with it pushing you down into your seat a little bit. But immediately after this, you'll be pushed upwards to get a little bit of floater air time to float out of your seat before turning right as you try to pass up on the yellow side's train. Now this moment includes some amazing head choppers as well as hand chopper elements where those support structures that hold up the track seem to be close enough to be able to touch. Now of course they are not, but it definitely adds a little bit of that extra thrill factor when you're going by them at such high speeds. Now immediately after this, you will find yourself looking upwards at the yellow side train as it does a 0G roll over you, and this is the last high five moment, at least for the white side I would say, before you turn right and what seems to be the station. Now of course you're in the same building, but this leads into a brake run in the middle of the ride and is called the pit stop. Now the pit stop is a show experience in the middle of the ride to make sure that you can duel every single time. But as you enter the pit stop, you will see some detailing as well as posters and potential designs as well as toolboxes around you, showing off that it's an area where you will get a tune-up. Now, not before long, you'll see Ryan Friedlinghaus, the CEO of West Coast Customs, as well as the founder, and he will appear on a television screen on the front left-hand side. Now, if you're near the back of the train, you might not be able to see it too well, but in the front, you should definitely have no problem being able to see that TV, with Ryan stepping out, telling you about what's going on in the pit stop. Now very quickly you'll notice that there is a speaker system that's set up that will start to make sounds like you're getting a tune-up as well as an extreme subwoofer to try and shake the car a little bit. And I think it's a cool effect, but it definitely needs a little more work, at least in the future, I would say personally. But overall, I don't mind the pit stop at all. Some of the details are very nice. Just my biggest problems with it are the audio, especially when Ryan starts to talk to you about how you're getting a tune-up, but you can barely hear him because the tune-up has already started and it's really loud. But soon Ryan will leave the screen and say that your next time round is going to be even more epic, and soon you'll find yourself rolling out to a place that seems all too familiar, but with a different colored track. You'll soon see another car, though, on your right-hand side rolling out of the station with you before you line up and get ready to start your second lap. Now, I do wish while you were standing out here that there was potentially some audio that could happen with some revving engines or potentially squealing tires, because there are speakers set up that you can notice while you're on the trains, so it would be a nice detail to have that, I think, and to also potentially give a better indication of when you are about to be launched, instead of just hearing that eerie squeal of an LSM launch system. But soon again, you'll be racing up to 55 miles an hour into a high five moment, just like on the white side, but this time on the yellow track. And I would say this element is not as extreme on the yellow side, which is a little weird considering it is technically the same element. But maybe it's just the way it turns out, but you will still get an awesome pop of ejector airtime, just not as intense. Soon after this, you'll end up diving underneath the white track before seeing the white train go right overhead during the Top Gun stall. Now for the yellow side in this moment, they don't really do much. There's not any airtime or any forces whatsoever. It is really just focusing on that train go above head. So I think if you weren't racing this element, it would be kind of meh. But since you are racing at that point, you get an amazing view of the smiling faces overhead, which is really cool. Soon after this, though, you'll make a right-handed turn and get a little bit of floater airtime heading into that fourth and final launch. And with this, you won't have any weird lateral forces like on the white side. You just kind of dive straight into it. And again, it feels like you press the left bumper on a Switch controller to hit that mushroom item to give you a quick burst of speed. And I know a lot of people have been complaining about this launch, that it's not elongated enough or powerful enough, but I personally really don't mind it. There's been a couple rides where I've had my head a little bit forward and it gets pushed right back because of the launch, and its real purpose is just to make sure you have enough speed to make it through the rest of the layout. And honestly, if it launched a little quicker, that second half of that layout would be probably a little too intense for at least what I would think the target audience is. Now, of course, you will head up into a corkscrew again on the yellow side, but this one's a little different. There's a weird little airtime pop before twisting left, but it gives an amazing visual when you are going against the other train, especially when you look over to the side you are facing off against. But again, this element gives some awesome hang time, but I wouldn't say as awesome as the white side's corkscrew, but that's because this corkscrew is over a little quicker and is a little more rapid, because immediately after it, you get flung over left as you try and catch up with that white side train. This is actually what I would say is the most forceful moment of the ride, at least in positive G-forces, because this is actually a place where I've grayed out a couple of times. Now, it's not a full gray out like something on Goliath or something like that, or Batman even, but it does get my feet a little tingly, as well as blur my vision just a tiny bit. But this is while you're catching up to that white side car, and it's a really cool visual while you're on the yellow side in that spaghetti bowl or the figure 8 section. Soon after this, you will rise up again, not as high as on the white side, and you won't really get any crazy floater airtime or anything like that. It's just a transition to turn right, and it's very smooth, which leads into another portion that you might potentially get a little bit of that forceful feeling before crossing over that wash in a very cool way that you crossed over during those second and fourth launches with a little bit of a floater pop. And what I mean by that is just a half a second of quick weightlessness, which is really enjoyable, before getting flung left to the fourth and final inversion, which is this awesome 0G roll. Now, I will say, if you are on the left-hand side of the train, oh my goodness, the hang time just wants to rip you down to the ground. It is fantastic on the left-hand side of the train. Now, on the right side, of course, it is awesome as well, just not as extreme. But immediately having that train pass underneath you on the white side, you will cross underneath the white side track immediately after and head into the station. And with that, your racing rides are over on West Coast Racers. You'll exit to the right-hand side, grab your bag, and head down the stairs, or of course elevator if you need it, towards the Magic Mountain Speed Shop, where you can get, of course, any type of mementos for the ride or West Coast Customs. Now, I gotta say, West Coast Racers is a ride that will always be tied to me as well as my channel, just because I was covering it for so long. This ride did have some delays, if you did not know, and it ended up opening for previews in December of 2019. Now, I started these updates the moment I saw progress happening at Cyclone Bay early in July of 2018. So it did take about a year and a half from the beginnings of construction to an opening, and a lot of people I know were kind of mad about that. But in all honesty, I don't mind it at all. It is one of the best things that the park has done in the past 10 years. Now, obviously, it's not the most extreme coaster at the park, but it does add something that the park was missing. And that is what we are all starting to call, very lovingly, a tweener coaster. It's not extreme enough to turn away people that aren't very big fans of going upside down or too quick or too high in the air. But it also is thrilling and fun enough to keep people that love extreme thrills satisfied. I would actually say this is a fantastic choice as a second looping coaster in the park, as well as potentially a first launch coaster inside the park before taking on something more extreme like Full Throttle or Superman, because it's not as fast or tall or forceful as those rides. but the land as well as the ride were definitely worth the wait in my opinion, and I enjoy West Coast Racers more than I was actually expecting to. Is it the most amazing coaster at the park? No, I wouldn't say that at all. But is it one of the most re-rideable coasters at the park? I definitely think so. The racing and dueling of the ride makes it something that you can ride over and over again and always get a different experience. Whether you win the race, lose the race, have some interesting trash talk, or you just like seeing the smiling faces above or below you, it always gives you a cool experience. Now, is the ride perfect? No, of course not. But if I really had to describe this ride in one word, it would be fun. It is one of the most fun rides at the park without being extreme. Now, yes, this ride does have 4 launches and 4 inversions, but the 4 launches aren't too crazy. I would actually argue that first launch on Incredicoaster is more forceful. So if you've been on that, I think you could probably do West Coast Racers no problem. And if I really need a good comparison of what this ride is, in my mind, it is Manta at SeaWorld San Diego with inversions and with it being a dueling coaster. Now, if you've seen my review of Manta, you know I really love that ride, and the same goes for West Coast Racers. It is actually higher ranked than I was thinking at Magic Mountain, and on a lot of days I would definitely say it's in my top 5, but it is one of the lone coasters at the park that I would have no problem riding 10 times in a row. That's not a knock towards the other coasters like X2 or Tatsu, it's just a little harder to re-ride those just because of how intense they are. But anyways, this means I have to rate it, and I have kind of an unorthodox rating system if you did not know. I give out 4 different ratings, one being a ski slope rating of what type of rider you should be on the ride itself, as well as an intensity 5-star rating, a fun 5-star rating, and an overall score out of 10. So to start this off, I gotta give my ski slope rating, and this is actually one of the tougher things I've had to come up with. And I gotta be honest, I'm probably gonna have to split it in between 2 ratings. It is for an intermediate / experienced rider. It really is in between the 2. I think if you can do Revolution just fine, you probably won't have a problem with West Coast Racers. And if you can do anything at the park like Batman or Riddler's Revenge or Twisted Colossus, you'll have no problem at all with riding West Coast Racers. Now, moving on to the score for intensity out of 5 stars, I'm actually going to give this a 3-star rating. I had to think about this one as well, but there are some intense moments, and I would say it's definitely a little more intense with the hang time that you experience on some of the inversions. And of course, not to forget those awesome airtime pops on the high five moments. But for fun, I gotta give this 4 out of 5 stars. It really is just a super fun coaster, especially with all of the racing and dueling aspects of the ride and the many crossover moments. And out of 10, this might be a little controversial, but I personally would give it a 9. Now, there are definitely a couple rides at the park that I prefer, but man, West Coast Racers is probably the most re-rideable out of my top 8 or so. The dueling really just makes the ride that much better. And to be completely honest, if there was no dueling whatsoever, it would definitely be an 8 out of 10 for me. No questions asked. But with that dueling, in effect, it really just makes it a better coaster overall. And I know it's something that I can always go to just for a little pump of adrenaline. But before I end this review, I just want to ask, what are your thoughts on West Coast Racers at Magic Mountain? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm very interested to see what you guys think. And I gotta say a huge thank you if you've watched all the way through. I know this video is extremely long, but I really appreciate it. And make sure to subscribe if you've ended up staying all the way through, because I'm going to have tons more reviews coming from Six Flags Magic Mountain, Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, and SeaWorld San Diego in the near future, as well as a ton of new construction updates and vlogs from all of those parks and more. But until next time, we'll see you on the next ride.